Okay, we're going to do the fifth sacred thing, chapter 17. It seemed to Maya that the whole city had come to council. She recognized many people. Some she hadn't seen in years, since she stopped going to meetings of the Writers' Guild. But they were surrounded by ranks of strangers crowded into every spare corner of space, practically sitting in the laps of the masked voices. The crowd provided visual relief from the tension in the room. San Franciscans had always loved costume, Maya reflected. Now fashion had become tribal. One's garb announced one's loyalties and identity. The contingent from the north side favored high-collared jackets and soft brocades, chrysanthemum padded silks, sarongs, or plain denim trousers vaguely reminiscent of the China of the 1970s. The neighbors of the Black Dragon house sported ponchos and brightly embroidered cotton shirts. The techies wore unadorned jumpsuits in solid colors. The delegations from the tribal lands upriver wore their full traditional regalia, complete with feather cloaks and basketry hats. Let me plug the computer in. We'll have to switch spots. I wanted to sit in that chair because my back has been messing up a little bit. I have mild scoliosis, and sometimes it really gets to me. Yeah, I have mild scoliosis, and sometimes it really gets to me. I developed that from carrying my son until he was about the age of 10 on one hip because he didn't walk until he was 11. So I carried him a lot. Let's see. What I'm going to do is I'm going to sit and lean on this box. Because my back is really kind of. Oh. Okay. Jesus, Sarah. Come on. Sorry, guys. Dreams of you. I'm gonna let the music play in the background. I just kind of like the vibe right now, so hopefully it's not too distracting. If it is, I think my comments is on and you guys can let me know the music was distracting. I'm gonna start from the beginning. Chapter 17. It seemed to Maya that the whole city had come to council. She recognized many people. Some she hadn't seen in years, since she stopped going to meetings of the Writers' Guild. But they were surrounded by ranks of strangers crowded into every spare corner of space, practically sitting in the laps of the masked voices. Ugh. The crowd provided visual relief from the tension in the room. San Francisco had always loved costume, Maya reflected. Now, fashion had become tribal. One's garb announced one's loyalties and identity. The contingent from the north side favored high-collared jackets and soft brocades, chrysanthemum-patterned silks, sarongs, or plain denim trousers vaguely reminiscent of the China of 1970s. The neighbors of Black Dragon House sported ponchos and brightly embroidered cotton shirts. The techies wore unadorned jumpsuits in solid colors. The delegations from the tribal lands upriver wore their full traditional regalia, complete with feather cloaks and basketry hats, while the ferrymen from Center City were bedecked with scarves and costume jewelry. Within those broader categories were hundreds of variations. A woman with 5 dangling earrings in each lobe, a slim man in a rhinestone-studded vest, a tall person of indeterminate sex in a leotard and tutu. Hair was shaved, sculpted, braided, twined, cornrowed, dreadlocked, colored, beaded, and freely hanging loose. Maya herself wore crones black. Simple, she thought, and well suited to her age and purported dignity. In one corner sat groups from the forest communities to the east and north, sporting rough work clothes and heavy boots. Around the room sat clusters of representatives from the other cities that hugged the bay and the habitable spots of the river valleys. Against the far wall sat the representatives of the wild boar people, their matted hair caked with dirt. Council had sent them a special invitation for this meeting. People left a moat of empty space around them, and windows were opened in their vicinity. Those boar people. The crowd settled down after a great deal of jostling, shuffling, and adjusting of feet and arms and legs. Bird sat squashed against Maya's right side, with Sage crammed between his legs. On his left side, Nita perched on Holly Bear's lap. When everyone was settled, a man and a woman rose in the center. I'm Joseph. I'm Salal. We're the Crows, the facilitators for this meeting. On the signers' platform, a young woman began translating the words of those who preferred not to speak the sign On the signers' platform, a young woman began translating the words of those who preferred not to speak and sign simultaneously. The meeting had begun. Joseph lit a candle, and Salal formally invited in the spirits of the 4 sacred things. Maya felt the atmosphere of the room deepen, and the voices went into trance. A woman in a white headcloth and flowing skirts stood up and called Elegba the trickster, god of the crossroads. Sage rose and called Hecate. A very young man stood up and invoked the ancestors. Sister Marie, who was seated not far from them, asked the blessings of the Virgin. A man Maya recognized from the Seder recited the Shema. The calling went on and on until finally Sam stood up. Look, I don't want to step on anybody's religion, but we can call all the spirits in the universe, and in the end, we're still going to have to decide what to do. Maybe we'd better get on with it before the steward's troops get over San Bruno Hill. There was a slight ripple of laughter as Joseph asked, Are we ready to begin the discussion? Yes, the room thundered. All right, then. He peered around the room with his dark, narrowed eyes, running his hands over the brush of his clipped black hair. There's only one main question on the agenda today, and that is, what the hell are we going to do? Can we hear a report from the defense first? Salal suggested. What exactly is the situation? The woman who rose to speak looked to be in her 80s. She had clear gray eyes and short cropped white hair, and Maya recognized her suddenly as Greta Jean, one of the Las Cuarto. Besides her, Lily was seated, dressed in a simple black shift. She and Maya exchanged nods and greetings. There's an army of approximately 5,000 marching up the old Highway 101, Greta said. They're repairing the road as they go, and we assume that when they reach the good stretch on the peninsula, which should be in about a week, they'll bring up trucks from the south. Along the same route, they're also laying rail, which the Santa Cruz and Peninsula councils have been sabotaging rather systematically. They're well armed with laser rifles, handguns, and, we assume, other weapons. 5,000? That's not so bad, someone murmured. That's only the advance guard. The main purpose seems to be to protect road-building operations. There's more on the way. How many more? Salal asked. Bird stood. All eyes in the room turned to look at him. He felt almost ashamed, as if by bringing news of the invasion, he were somehow responsible for it. From what I saw last summer, he said, there could easily be at least 10 times that many. What the hell do they feed all those people? Someone murmured. They feed on people like us, Bird said. They'll eat up all our gardens, our fields, and our optimism pretty quick. He sat down. And what do we have in the way of defense resources? Joseph asked. Lily stood up and carefully enumerated the number of available weapons in the city's defenses. The discussion left Maya somewhat lost, but she could see Bird's face looking more and more grim. Holy Bear wore a glum mask, and even Manzanita wasn't smiling. Why didn't we start weapons production 3 months ago? A young woman asked. We have no factories to make guns and bombs and laser rifles, said a large man whom Maya had seen before, speaking for the Technicians Guild. We have no consensus to build them, and if we had, it would have been at the expense of something else, food production or communications or transport, especially if you remember that we were recovering from another epidemic, and it's been hard enough to keep basic services going. That's exactly what they wanted. We could have tightened our belts, said a young man who was, in Maya's opinion, already far too thin. Maybe, the big man said, but if we start choosing guns over food and water, we become what we're fighting against. But if we lose to the stewards, we won't have the luxury of choosing food or water or anything else. That's the dilemma patriarchy has posed for the last 5,000 years, Greta said. I don't find that grounds for optimism, Sam said. In all those 5,000 years, has the peaceful side ever won out? Why is it so hard to believe in war? Bird thought. I've been to the Southlands. I've faced their power. And yet I still can't grasp that they'll succeed in imposing it here. He wanted to ask Maya if every war she'd lived through had seemed unreal. Isn't that our collective challenge, then? Lily said. If we don't have guns, we have vision and imagination. A vision ain't much protection against a laser rifle, a voice called from the back of the crowd. The talk went on interminably, as strategy after strategy was proposed, examined, and eventually abandoned, and unpromising, if not hopeless. Don't give up, Lily addressed the room as discussion lagged. We are simply challenged now to extend our imaginations beyond solutions that have been tried before. Well, we seem to have exhausted all practical, rational, and reasonable approaches to this situation, Saul said. What it comes down to is nobody can see a way out. Am I wrong? So either we need a miracle, an evacuation plan, or a proposal for how to go down with dignity. She doesn't believe it either, Bird noted. Not really. Otherwise, how could she sound so cheerful, tossing her red-flamed hair and smiling as she talks of despair? The speaker turned and made her careful way to the west, bending her ear to Salmon. Friend Salmon says you have placed spawn in Los Lobos Creek, and we will return. Don't give up. Listen to the storyteller. The masked figure inclined its head toward Maya. She found herself staring into its eyes. She had hoped to avoid speaking today, had prayed that the defense had some secret plan that would absolve her from sharing her vision. And it's partly embarrassment, she admitted to herself, that for over half a century I have been spokeswoman for the goddess, and here, at the crucial moment, I turn up with a visitation from an Old Testament prophet. Am I merely getting senile? More than that, the implications of her vision scared her. It seemed to call for qualities of courage and vision she was not sure that anyone possessed. Reluctantly, she stood up. I'm a storyteller, she said, and I had a vision. I don't much like it, and I'm not sure what good it might do us. But for what it's worth, here it is. She told them about her visit with the prophet Elijah, and they listened respectfully. She finished with the words Elijah had spoken to her. What happens to the enemy who is invited to share the feast? Does that enemy not transform? Tell your enemies this. There is a place set for you at our table, if you will choose to join us. Silence intensified throughout the room. So what you're proposing is, Joseph asked, nonviolent resistance. Something like that seems indicated, Salal said, given that success in violent resistance seems beyond our means. How does it work? A young woman from the forest communities asked. Like the King of Denmark, Maya said. The faces around her looked puzzled. Don't they teach you history? In World War II, when the Nazis took over most of Europe, they issued a proclamation that all Jews had to wear a yellow star on their clothing. It was the first step toward rounding them up and sending them to the ovens. And most countries collaborated. But in Denmark, the day after the law was proclaimed, the king rode out wearing a yellow star, and so did everybody else. Their Jews survived. But how would it work here? Someone else asked. Maya answered, suppose that nobody in the city obeys the invaders, or helps them, or gives them information. Suppose all we say to the soldiers when they come is, there's a place for you at our table if you will choose to join us. Complete non-cooperation? Greta asked. I'm not a Gandhian, Maya said. I've worked in nonviolent movements all my life, but I've never believed in the spiritual benefits of self-immolation. To be honest, I don't know if this will work. In part, it depends on the enemy we're facing and how ruthless they're willing to be. Bird stood again. He had been arguing with Maya all week, and he was still unsure whether he would come around to agreeing with her. They are ruthless, he spoke slowly, signing his own words as he went, as if deliberately to display his broken hands. I've been up against some of them, and frankly, I can't envision them transforming, even under the influence of our sweet characters. But there's this. Of those first 5,000, at least 4,500 are going to be black, brown, yellow, red, or some combination, mixed with just plain poor. And they're in the army because they come out of a world you can't even imagine. I can hardly imagine it myself, even though I was locked up in it for 10 years, where the color of your skin determines everything about you, where if you don't have money, not only don't you eat, you don't drink. These guys, they may never have seen free running water. They're going to come marching in here, and they're going to look like paradise on earth. This is going to look like paradise on earth to them. So it just might work. Some of them might welcome an invitation to come over, but not all. If we do this, some of us are going to die. Some of us are going to be hurt, imprisoned, beaten, and tortured. And if we fight? Lily asked. We would be fighting, just in a different way, Nita said. If we fight them with guns, Lily went on. She spoke from her seat quietly, yet her voice carried across the room and rang with authority. Aren't some of us going to die, be imprisoned, tortured? Then? Are we just forgetting the satisfaction of taking a few of them along with us? Don't knock that satisfaction, Bird said. It's real. Real it may be, Lily said, but it is an indulgence we cannot afford, because what is on trial here is not just us. We stand on the ridgeline of the future, the great divide determining whether or not what we have built can survive. It will survive if we have the guts to defend it, said Cress of the Water Council, rising and pushing back the red bandana that bound her dark hair. He glared defiantly at Lily, taking in Bird also with a hostile glance and looking, Maya thought, like an old poster of Che Guevara that had hung in the grease-spattered kitchen she shared with Rio in the 60s. Yarda, Bird thought. Not Cress. Lily was right. He should have talked to him privately first. But Bird had resisted the idea. He remembered Crest from a decade back when his name had been Carlos, and he had shown such talent on the guitar that the Musicians Guild had offered him membership. He declined and joined the Water Council. Why? Bird had asked, meeting him in the market a few days later. You're good, hombre. Because music is a luxury. Water is a necessity. Music is more than a luxury. We all know what happens to a society that doesn't value music and art and dance. We all know what happens to a society that doesn't protect its own survival. Carlos Kress had turned to stare coldly into Bird's eyes. Or maybe you don't. I do. I was born in Fresno. I know what it's like when the temperature climbs up above 110 degrees day after day and the crops bake and die, and there's less and less every week to eat. My folks didn't want to leave, like most did, so they hung on until the quake of 27. By then we'd pumped so much water out of the aquifers that the land fell in on empty water table when the trembler hit. Every standing structure fell. My baby sister and I were buried under our house, pinned by the roof beams. I can still hear her voice calling for water, getting weaker and weaker until she died. Bert had opened his mouth to say something, but Carlos went on without giving him a chance to speak. 3 days later, my dad dug us out. My brothers were dead, my mother was dead, but the two of us survived. We headed out for the Bay, unlike most of the misled fuckers who believed the millennialists about the hotbed of Satan worship here. They headed for the Oregon border, or south to the labor camps of L.A., where I'm sure the stewards picked their bones if they didn't die on the road. But we walked here. It took us 3 weeks in the heat, rationing every damn drop of water. Believe me, we weren't singing any songs. We weren't worrying about music. Bert had laid a sympathetic hand on Carlos's shoulder, but he shrugged it off and pulled away abruptly, walking off with only a curt goodbye. He told me more than he intended, Bert thought now, opened more than he meant to, and so he hated me, because I couldn't truly meet him there. I couldn't truly meet him then. He meant to. Wait, when I was what, 18? How could I have matched the authority of his suffering? Not then. But now he hates me because the arena of competitive suffering. I have an edge. Our guts are not in question here, Lily said. If courage was all we needed, we would not be worried. But wars are not fought just with guts, or even with weapons. They are struggles of consciousness. The true revolutionary is motivated by great feelings of love. That was what the poster of Chi had said, Maya remembered. Consciousness moves to a rhythm, Lily went on. It follows a beat, you could say. When disparate consciousnesses meet, they become more alike, just as two clocks beating to different rhythms set down next to each other will entertain. What does that mean to us? Kress said. It means the invaders coming into proximity with us will become more like us in spite of themselves. But doesn't it also mean that we will become more like them? Bird asked, although he hated to appear to be on Kress's side. And hasn't it already happened to me, 10 years in that place, so that I no longer really fit here? That is the question we must face and the art we must develop, Lily answered. The art of remaining who we truly are. If we can hold on to what we are, then even our enemies must change. You're asking for miracles, Kress complained. Only a miracle can save us. And who will make miracles for us if not ourselves? We need tools to make miracles with. We need weapons, and we still have some time. What if we were to start production immediately, round the clock, gift work from everyone? The woman sitting next to Kress suggested. We don't have the metal. Our factories aren't tooled for weapon production, and there is no possible way in a few weeks or even a few years we can equal the destructive capacities of a society that's made weapon their top priority for generations, said a woman in the plain garb of the techies. And if we defend ourselves in the old ways with force, Lily said, we will revert to the old ways of thinking and doing things and lose what we've built. I'm not willing to lie back and let the Stuarts run all over us, Kress said. I'm not willing to let them destroy what we have here. Water Council is in consensus about this. We will fight and die if need be to protect the waters. Fighting is all very well, Lily said, but winning is more to the point. We will win or die trying. More likely, someone called from the back of the room. That's it, Lily said. What good does it do to die trying if you lose in the end? The result for the waters, for the salmon, for the trees, for the people will be just the same. What good does it do to give up and not try at all? Crescent countered. At least we could have a chance, however slim. We're not talking about giving up, Greta said. We're talking about a different way of fighting. Fight fire with fire, yelled one of the wild boar people, and burn down the whole watershed, another voice called out. Quiet, please, Salal shouted. We have a process here. Let's stick to it. Lily, you have the floor. Cress, I sympathize with the strength of your commitment, Lily said, but you don't understand what is at stake here. The hell I don't! Don't patronize me. Forgive me, I should have put it differently. We of Defense Council see this struggle as more than a question of whether or not the Stuarts can take over here. Crucial as that question is, something even broader is at stake. Greta put it well when she said that this dilemma has faced every peaceful culture for the last 5 millennia, at least. Once this drive for power over and domination appeared on the planet, it became a force that no one could escape from for more than a breathing space. For either we submit and it triumphs, or we mobilize to fight against it, diverting our energies and resources and transforming ourselves into what we do not want to be. It's like a virus, mindlessly destructive, yet we cannot eradicate it without changing our own internal balance. We must develop an immunity to that virus, not just for ourselves, but for the planet. We've had a little space of time in isolation where we could pretend that life could carry on here without too much regard for what went on elsewhere, if only because we had no means to affect it. We have used that time well. We have shown in this city, in this watershed, that even on this ruined and ravaged and poisoned earth, people can live well together, can care for one another, can heal and build in harmony with what is around us. We have demonstrated hope. Now it is up to us to sustain that hope, not to abandon it in the despair of violence. Maya rose. This is my vision, she thought, if I believe it. If even a kernel of me believes it and trusts it, I must speak for it. I support what Lily is saying. Many years ago, the poet Dion di Prima wrote a line that comes back to me now. The only war that counts is the war against the imagination. I often wondered what she meant by it, but now I think I understand. All war is first waged in the imagination. First conducted to limit our dreams and visions, to make us accept within ourselves its terms, to believe that our only choices are those that lay before us. If we let the terms of force describe the terrain of our battle, we will lose. But if we hold to the power of our visions, our heartbeats, our imagination, we can fight on our own turf, which is the landscape of consciousness. There, the enemy cannot help but transform. She paused for breath. I'm orating, she thought, but that's okay. The subject calls for it. We old women have learned from our history and its mistakes. Many of you are too young to remember the wealth of the old society, the incredible resources, the power of its technology, the firepower of its weaponry, the sheer abundance of things, so many that they could be shamelessly squandered and wasted. Precious water was fouled by sewage and toxins. Whole industries were built to manufacture things to be used once and then discarded. But the greatest waste was war. I remember how we watched in frustration as all of the wealth, so many lives of blooming young women and men, all of our ingenuity and resources were poured down the hole of war after war after war. The Cold War, the Vietnam War, the Middle East, Latin America, riots in our own burning ghettos, big wars, small wars, and endless preparation for nuclear war. We waged war on ourselves with nuclear testing, gave our own citizens cancer, and then denied responsibility, poisoned the sacred lands of the Indians, and turned great rivers into radioactive sewers. And every time there was a glimpse of peace, we scurried to find a new enemy so we could continue this mindless wasting. Blowing up our wealth, burning it off, turning it into poisons and toxins, shooting it in the belly, shipping it home in body bags, murdering our own children and everybody else's. And meanwhile, we decayed. When I was born, when I grew up in the 50s, we believed our country was the land of opportunity, where nobody was doomed to remain poor, where every person of goodwill had a chance to rise. By the time my child was born in the 90s, beggars were crowding the streets of every city, accosting shoppers in the malls. There were camps of homeless in the parks and empty lots, young people going to war with each other over drugs and booze and a few bucks. Our compassion eroded faster than the topsoil. And when we begin to notice the earth changes, the droughts and the warming and the die-offs of the animals, the hole in the ozone layer and the epidemics of strange diseases that showed our own immune systems faltering, when we still had a chance to save so much and avert the worst of what followed, we continued to distract ourselves with war. It is plugged in. There we go. What I say, what I have always said, is there has got to be an end to it. Now is the time to make an end. There will never be a better time, because there is always a reason to fight and kill and build more guns and weapons. 20 years ago, when we founded this council, we said, make an end to it. We will not waste what hope is left to us by building weapons of war. We knew this day would come. We hoped only that when it did, we would have other kinds of weapons to fight with. Now it is here. Now we had better be ready to take up the challenge, as Lily said, or we will die, and perhaps the earth will rethink this whole experiment in consciousness and start afresh to grow some other form, less aggressive, maybe less extreme, less surprising. There was a long moment of silence when she finished, and then an applause echoed through the hall. Good one, Maya, Bird thought. You've convinced me. When the room grew quiet again, Joseph spoke. Who else has something to say? Sachiko from the Musicians' Guild rose. It seems to me that this decision is both strategic and spiritual. We have a lot of differences in this city. We come from different ancestors, different cultural traditions, different values, different religions. Water is my religion, Crush shouted, interrupting her. Water is my politics, and water is my strategy. Several people applauded, but Salal glared at him. Interrupting is a form of bullying, Cress. Wait your turn. The speaker raised her hand, calling for silence, and bent her ear to the salmon mask. Friend Salmon says, learn from water. Water is malleable. Water is gentle. But drops of water wear away stone, and everything it touches is shaped by its passing. She sat down again. I was trying to say something, Sachiko said. Please continue, Joseph nodded at her. What I wanted to say is this. Spiritually, we come from many different traditions, but we hold in common, what unites us all, is the declaration of the four sacred things. It tells us that air, fire, water, and earth are sacred, because nothing can live without them. It says that they have a value that goes beyond human ends, and it says that all living beings are part of earth life, and so are sacred. Some of us interpret this to mean that killing is wrong, that we cannot engage in war. Some of us won't even kill a chicken or a catfish, but others among us believe that it tells us to fight and, if need be, sacrifice ourselves to protect the sacred things. If this question were only spiritual, we could debate it all day and never come to consensus, but we don't agree, and maybe we shouldn't agree. Maybe we need both views in the city. But our dilemma is also practical, and we've already acknowledged that we don't have the weapons to win a war against the Stuarts. So what I want to know is, why are we still arguing about whether or not we should use nonviolence? We don't have another option, so let's stop wasting time. What we need to be discussing is how to use nonviolence and non-cooperation and make them effective and win. She sat down to a storm of applause, but Crest jumped to his feet. Why do we assume we can't win a war? Guerrilla tactics have worked before in situations just like this, when an invading power tries to conquer a people with strong morale. Why are we limiting ourselves? Sure, try nonviolent resistance, but why rule out sabotage or judicious assassination? We could pick off their leaders and capture more weapons if we can't produce them. Bird rose. We haven't ruled out sabotage, he said. Already down the peninsula, our friends are blowing up their rail lines. That's different from killing people. Guerrilla wars can be won, but not quickly or easily. Assassinations bring reprisals. We can kill some of them, but they can afford to lose hundreds, thousands for every one of us, because every single person in this city is precious to us. You're afraid, Cress said. They've intimidated you. You're scared to take them on. I'll take you on, asshole, Bird thought, but before he could speak, he felt Holy Bear's restraining hand on his arm, heard him whisper, "Calmate." And why am I letting him get to me? Bird asked himself. Am I secretly afraid that he's right? A low murmur ran through the crowd. He's lost their sympathy, Bird realized. He's gone too far. I am afraid, Bird admitted. We're all afraid. We have reason to be. For 5,000 years, Cress, men have been goading one another into acts of brutality and stupidity by calling each other cowards. Well, it doesn't matter what you call me. This threat is real. We can't just use it as an arena to prove our courage, to our machismo or our dedication or anything else, or we'll all be destroyed. I've got to think about this clearly. Don't interrupt me. I have the floor. Cress had half risen to speak, but he sat down again. Submission, Bird thought, like a dog dropping his tail. And already I feel calmer. Will we ever evolve beyond this? Let me speak to the issue of strategy, Bird went on. I don't know if nonviolent resistance will work, but if it does, it will be because the ordinary soldiers come to realize that fighting us is not truly in their own best interests. We know that. We don't know if they can be brought to see it, but we can't convince them of it by shooting them. We've got to commit ourselves one way or another to try to destroy them or win them over. From purely strategic point of view, I think the second course of action is a better bet. But as Sachiko said, this decision is not just one of strategy. He paused. Rio's ghost's hand rested on his shoulder. They are all listening to me so intently, Bird thought, as if they think I know what I'm talking about. And do I? Maybe not, but Rio, I've thought about what you asked me at Samhain. I've thought long and deep. There's one question here that we need to face clearly, Bird went on. Not whether we're ready to die, because many of us will die. Whether we're ready or not. The question we each have to answer is whether we're willing to kill. This war doesn't start when the troops arrive. It's been going on most of my lifetime. I have almost died already in it. And I have killed. It's very easy to kill once. You take up a weapon in your hand. Nothing is easier or more natural. My hands aren't worth much anymore. But still, I don't want to put them to work making weapons or holding weapons. I do not want to kill again. Now the room was absolutely still. They trust me, Bird thought. My words carry weight with them. Except for Cress and his faction, who hates me a little, Diosa. I hope I'm right. Nobody spoke. Cress's head was sunk into his shoulders, and the other members of the Water Council were nodding thoughtfully. Do we have an agreement in principle that this is the direction we want to take? Joseph asked. How can we agree to something in principle if we don't know what the plan is? Someone called. We're agreeing to the principle of a strategy of resistance based on nonviolence and non-cooperation. Then let's work out the strategy before we agree to it, someone shouted. Okay, Joseph gave in, who has practical suggestions or concerns to raise. This is the proposal from defense, Greta said, that we do not aid them or cooperate with them in any way, that we don't insult or antagonize individuals, but refuse to obey any order or command. If they attempt to destroy something of ours, we physically but non-violently block them. And yes, we like Maya's suggestion that we offer them a place at our table, and mean it. Certainly there is room here for more people, should some of them wish to settle. Are there questions on that proposal? Salal asked, or concerns to raise? I have one, Cress said. He faced Bird. You said we have to commit ourselves one way or another. Okay, Water Council isn't too happy with this proposal, but we won't block it. We won't oppose the will of the city. But if we adopt it, we have to be prepared to go all the way. No collaboration, no cooperation. in the big things or the small things. No giving way to their attempts to intimidate us. Agreed, Bird said, although a little swirl of uneasiness ran down his back. It's so easy to be absolute in theory, he thought, but when they come... Cress stood for a moment, surveying the room, commanding it. Heads nodded at him in every direction. Satisfied, he sat down. Other concerns? Salal asked. I have one, Bird said. For days, he'd been trying to picture in his imagination what might happen, what might work. They'll look for our leaders. We ought to let them find a few. We don't have leaders, one of Cress's circles objected. That could be argued, Holy Bear said. Defense will volunteer, Greta offered. No offense, Greta, Bird said, but you don't understand the way they think. They're never in a millennium going to believe that the city is led by a bunch of old women. They're going to look for the biggest, strongest men they can find, pick a few to throw to them. Human sacrifices? Volunteers, Bird said. What are you suggesting? Saul asked. We set up a pseudo-council, said an older man. It wouldn't have to be big. Hell no, Bird said. It's more believable to them if it's small, and one guy is the head of it. You could have a woman or two. Actually, that'd be better. There's a whole thing they have about women in this city. They'd be disappointed if they didn't find any women in power. It should represent all the races, Greta said, not just because of reprisals, because we'll be sending a message to all of them, the ones we hope to turn. They talked on about composition of the group until Salal called for volunteers. I'll volunteer, Sister Marie said, rising to her feet. But you're not well, Sage objected. I have very little to lose. There was another long moment of silence, then slowly Bird rose to his feet. Now it comes, he thought. Let me open my mouth, and there's no going back, once again. His jaw felt heavy, reluctant to move, but he forced it open. I'll volunteer, he said. It was my suggestion. It's the only right that I should volunteer for it. Maya reached out her hand as if to pull him back down, but she let it drop in midair. Pain, almost physical in its intensity, shrieked through her body. Oh God, it's not him. Not again. It's not fair. Ow. Oh. Oh. Shit. There's my camera again. I do that every time. Where is it? Did I turn the page? Here it is. Besides, he said, maybe more than anybody else here, I do know what we're getting into. I know how their system works. I think this is the way I can be most useful. You can be most useful if you use your true gift, Lily said. Maybe I know better than you what that is. Maybe it's a talent for endurance, not for music. Lily, fuck you anyway. He said that in his head. Haven't you suffered enough, Bird? Sam asked. When the stewards come, Sam, we're all going to suffer. Are you sure you can take it? Cress asked. Lily intervened before Bird could speak. Nobody is ever sure what they can or cannot withstand. Are you so sure of your own endurance, Cress? I'm not leaping forward eagerly to be our leader, Cress said. I don't want to be anybody's leader, Bird said. If there are any questions about my motivations, believe me, I'll happily withdraw. No, we want you, voices chorused from around the hall, and he was acclaimed by consensus. Cress remained silent. The discussion went on, but Maya heard no more of it. Bird sat back down, and Sage laid her hand on his knee in sympathy. But why give me sympathy more than the others? Bird thought. What I said is true. Who can predict who will suffer and who will escape when the war comes? Lou stood up to volunteer, but was rejected. The city couldn't spare its healers. Finally, they chose graceful, dark-eyed Lon, a teacher of Indonesian dance, who who had lost his wife and child at the last disease, and white-haired Roberto, Salal's grandfather, a robust man in the early 70s. Other concerns or additions to the proposal? Joseph asked. The East Bay towns have a suggestion, said a tall woman in a green cape, and I believe the North Bay is with us on this. What's that? Salal asked. Blow up the bridges? There was dead silence in the room. If war is like a virus, shouldn't we try as much possible to isolate it? We've already demolished the stretch of the old roadbed leading up to the east side of the bay from San Jose contaminated area. We think they'll head straight up on the peninsula, not try to go our way. Once they're here, the bridges are their main routes east and north. If they have to repair them or cross by water, it could delay them considerably, especially if we remove water transport from the side. It won't stop them, it'll only delay them, came an objection. But who knows what will happen in the time? Maybe they will transform. Maybe we'll have time to come up with some other plan. But then if we win, a young man in the tunic favored by the techies asked, do we have the resources to repair the bridges? Considering they were built in the 1930s, we ought to be able to muster up technology's expertise, the woman said. It's not technology, but the iron and steel and the industrial infrastructure, protested an older man. We are in the most ways a backward, primitive country compared to the United States of the 1930s. Engineering Council has considered this. We can do it if we have to do it. It's a waste, Meyer proposed. But perhaps worthwhile one, Lily said. We cannot hope to come out of this completely pure. Bridges can be rebuilt. Lives cannot. Maya winced. She loved the bridges, the graceful arch of the Golden Gate, the long sweep of the Bay Bridge. They were human-made, yet they had the grace and beauty of the rightness of natural objects. But she kept silent, lest this be the worst sacrifice they made, and she would not complain. There was more discussion, but the group generally seemed to feel that sacrificing the bridges made sense. Okay, here's the proposal, Salal said. We must mount a campaign of nonviolent non-cooperation, refusing all aid to the enemy, offering the soldiers a place at our table if they join us. We have chosen a liaison council to interface with them and pose as the leadership of the city. And before the soldiers arrive, we blow the bridges and attempt to make transportation a major problem. Anything I've forgotten? Training, Greta said. We need to train ourselves for this encounter, just as if we're going into battle with weapons. I can help with that, Bird said. Do we have consensus? The Wild Boar people will spear the ass of anybody who messes with us, said a dreadlock figure from the corner. That has always been our position, and we hold to it. Of course, Salal said. Of the booted figures in the corner rows, the forest communities stand aside. We won't interfere with you here in the city, but we're not ready to commit ourselves to a nonviolent stance at this time. We need to go back home and talk this over. To tell the truth, I don't know what the answer will be. We have a good stockpile of rifles. The roads and rail lines into our lands are easily cut and guarded. The trees are our families. I tend to think we'll fight if the fight comes to us. But if you have folks you want to protect or things you need to preserve, we can offer a refuge if you come soon. There's places in the mountains where armies will never go. And whatever happens down below here, whatever becomes of the city, some of us will survive. Remember that. The East Bay towns... I hope that's the cat eating the cat food. Skylar, is that you? I think it's Romeo. The East Bay towns will have to consider our own strategies, said their representative. We have listened to the debate. We will report a decision at another council. A woman Maya recognized from the Pomo dances in the autumn stood. The tribes cannot yet say what we will do. We have listened to the words of the elders, and we listen with respect. Now we will go back to talk among ourselves. Well then, do we have a consensus? Salal asked again. Around the room, people raised their clasped hands in the signs of agreement. That's a victory right there, Holy Bear murmured. Maya put her face in her hands and wept. Good chapter. As hard as kerosene, your